Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hi. Yeah, Jesse said he'd be maybe a little bit late. We'll see. So, how are things with the both of you?
Pretty good.
Great. Oh, Brian's bandwidth is having issues, but anyways, yeah. Any updates?
I don't think so. Been continuing to sort through my PDFs. I looked at that analog computer link that you shared. That looks really neat.
Oh, yeah. We can go over that in a little bit, actually. Yeah. Well, great. Yeah, and we're doing well with the reading group. We're planning, Wednesday we were planning out our next steps, or sort of our next, our deliverable set, I guess. And I think it's one of the things that I wanted to sort of see is have like the sort of bibliography or the sort of glossary of terms, so we can get our, this is useful for a number of things like blog posts or like, the general community of people. It's easy to write a critique of what's going on in cognitive science, but it's maybe a little bit better to say, here's some things that we can help improve upon in terms of practice, or in terms of integrating the field. So I think that's a good direction.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to getting farther along with that.
Yeah. There's Hussein. Hello, Hussein.
Hi, how are you?
All right, how are you?
Good.
So we're doing updates. Who wants to go next?
Updates on what?
Oh, just on what's been going on in the past few weeks, months, however long it's been since your last meeting here.
I guess I can share with you guys what's going on.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. So I guess hi Jesse. Okay. Yeah, so first of all, Bradley and I have met recently, and I'm really, really excited about GSOC 2023 because there's the opening up for a project involving Unity and Blender, being able to use that with the Devo Worm project, or Devo Graph, using virtual and augmented reality and the Devo Graph for studying graph neural networks and graph neural network theory. I'm really, really excited about that because that's basically what I've been like immersing myself in over the past few months, and it's almost like coincidental that Bradley just opened up this project for 2023. I'm like, oh, that's amazing, that's awesome. And speaking of Unity and Blender, that's basically what I've been learning quite a bit too. For those of you who are out of the loop, I'm still a PhD student at the University of Toronto. However, I'm right now looking for a new PhD supervisor for the next fall, for the fall of 2023. And I also applied to an MS program in analytics through Georgia Tech just to keep my options open. Yeah, I'm looking for a new PhD supervisor because of just some. I mean, it's just some personal things with the project that we decided it'd be best for me to switch to a new one and switch under a new PI. And the university is helping me, so they're completely supporting me. It's nothing like super. Nothing like super like personal or anything like that. But yeah, that's basically where I am right now. I'm still in the United States, and that because I'll be starting with a new PI in the fall, it means I can devote my time to Google Summer of Code, through oral again. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, it looks. The VR project is interesting because it's like I guess my goal there is to find ways to build things that are like appealing to people, but also have some value educationally, have some value research wise, and we have the Open Worm Foundation has a viewer where they call it a Open Worm browser, and I think I talked about this before. And this is a 3D model of a worm, and it has like the muscle defined and the nerves and the neurons. And so it has like you can toggle between layers of viewpoint. So you can turn it around, you can view it from different angles, and you can like turn on and off the muscles. So you can just see like the nervous system. You can turn on the muscles. You can see the body. So I mean, there are different ways that that can be done, but that's only like kind of in a browser, web browser. And so one of the things that would be cool is if someone could take that and turn it into something you could view in a headset, or actually get in the middle of it. With a headset, of course, would be a far different experience than getting in with a browser and just turning it around your point of view. So if I'm looking straight at the screen, I just move it around like this. I only see like one little section at a time, and it just kind of rotates. If I'm in a headset, I can actually pull it up, get in the middle, and turn my head, and I can see everything in 360. So it's a very different experience. And a lot of the early like scientific visualization, I guess it's still the case, is that people would use like visualization tools to project something on a large screen or in a space where they could walk through, and they could see things in different ways. So if you had a molecular simulation, for example, you'd have like, you could take like some molecular process and you could actually walk into it, which is, not the way we think of it generally, and then look around and see things that you wouldn't normally see. So it's kind of this interesting thing. In our Cognition Futures group, we've been talking about points of view and like how those things are, tied to experience. And I think that's an interesting example. We didn't really bring that one up.
I mean, it also ties in some ways to the paper that I just submitted, which I think I mentioned this to you guys, like the scientific realism in the virtual worlds. That was the paper that I wrote about the Morris water maze experiment with the rat swimming around in a tub of water, and why that's so relevant to debates on realism and anti-realism in the philosophy of science. I submitted that about a month ago, so that's it's still being processed in things, and cross your fingers, whatever happens.
Yeah.
With Blender though, but I've been, basically, getting my hands wet with whatever you can do in Unity and Blender. Like I made this donut.
Oh.
I learned how to animate in Blender, and I made a donut. See when people learn Blender, if you guys aren't so familiar, Blender is this 3D. It's the software. It's usually used for art and animation, but you can use it for you can basically use it for modeling and creating anything in either 2D or 3D. And there's this very, very popular tutorial on YouTube that teaches you all the basics of Blender. It teaches you how to make a donut. And I know it sounds like silly, but that's actually like, it teaches you the basics of like modeling, shading, textures, and like maybe you can look at this donut on a screen, and you have to like you have to know like a lot of like I don't know, artsy stuff to make things like that. It's just pretty fun. So
it's maybe why Homer Simpson likes donuts, because that's the easiest thing they could render. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Brian, how are you? Are you having problems with your audio? Oh yeah, I'm still having problems. If you have an update, you can just type it into the chat too. That's not like.
What is this?
There we go. I hear it now.
Oh,
good.
So we're not yet. Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, I've missed the last two meetings, which I'm sad about. But I've been taking time to do a lot of stuff. Since graduating, it's been kind of a hustle to try to figure out what to do. I'm still waiting to hear back for a PhD program, so sure most of us can identify with this position. But been having a blast going through my bibliography and thinking about things to add to the Cognition Futures methodology project. And if anybody wants to, that's fine. We always get weird noises from my mic. I wasn't working. Thank you, Hussein. Appreciate it. If anybody wants to join me in this, I'm so close to getting a Geekbot clone working for Orel and have been for months, but I just need another brain because my brain doesn't seem to be adequate. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm here. We can get this done. It'll be so much fun. But that's pretty much my thing.
Good. Yeah, good. That's I know we were trying to do this the Geekbot because we got cut off with the old system. We used to have the updates, the weekly updates, and it worked well. And then they wanted to charge people for it, or you couldn't do integrations or something. And so we lost that. And so Brian said, "Well, I could put one in. I could make one." The problem is, these home-brewed solutions are always a little harder than what you get in the package when you make an integration. So it's a little difficult to figure out how to get it to, make regular updates and things like that. But that's something that Brian is working on, and if people have that expertise, you could join in. It's probably not that much. I say that because it's famous last words. Not that much more to do.
Well, yeah. Really, what's left to do is I just need another brain, like really to bounce it off of, because I've pretty much unpacked all of the documentation for how to make a Slack bot and have made several. It's just kind of, for some reason, I can't do it myself. So you don't even need expertise. You just need to be another human being. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that. And the Cognition Futures bibliography, that's coming along. We'll be working on that throughout the next, however long it takes. There are examples of community resources, which are where you have people, you start small and you open it up to the community and people will contribute things. We've done this with, oh yeah, Amanda says she's a human being. She can help, maybe. So yeah, we have examples in the broader community where people have made, bibliographies and opened them up, and people will come and contribute, and they'll add their own entries in. The advantage of that being is that, people have other interests and they think about things that we don't necessarily think about. And so they have different perspectives. But I think to start with, we definitely would do an internal, between maybe 4 or 5 or 6 of us, kind of putting things in the pot and seeing what we can build as like a first draft of a bibliography. And then once we have that, we can figure out how to present it and how to version it, because you're going to have new versions, how to incorporate new things. There are going to be things like standards that come up, and it sounds like a lot of work, but it's really just the work of building something that's going to be sustainable, like something that we don't just toss aside and don't look at again. So what was in the chat here? So Jesse said that might be something to mention in the Slack also. Potentially some interns may be interested. So yeah, we have a number of interns that have recently joined our Slack. In the general channel, you'll see some new people, and those people are here for the internship opportunities for this spring. So last spring we had a number of interns. Brian was one of them, and they did, they spent, some of them spent the semester, some of them spent longer doing different things, and it's always, you always have to have that one thing that you start with that gets you off the ground. And so this might be something, or, there are other opportunities. I know we have all sorts of things going on in the group. So if there's a bite-sized task maybe that you think an intern might be interested in, you could post it in the general channel. Or, I guess we have an interns channel, but that's, we'll think about where we want to put those, but anyways, I think, if you have something that would be of interest to people, we want to bring it to their attention. Okay. Jesse, are you there? I don't know if you're available to talk right now, but
I can say a little bit,
Okay.
but I won't be able to say a whole lot right now.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things in the docket in terms of things that are due in the next little bit. There's revising the New York Celebration of Women in Computing abstract that's been accepted. there's the cog size stuff, and I'm a little bit unsure about that, what that exactly will be. Oh, look at a different page here, because I'm trying to recall exactly about it's like 6 or 2 pages, I think, are for that one, for the main event, and there's also a separate. There's a few different ways to apply to that or suggest things to it, so that will kind of be another. That might just be a shorter version of something for the tutorials, symposia, or workshops, but we'll see. And I feel like there's a whole bunch of other deadlines too that we mentioned in the last few weeks, and I don't know exactly which ones they are that I should mention here. But I just there's also the Bond AI open, like Bond sustainable AI one that was pushed back, which I'm kind of considering putting. And they're one of them is sort of like about AI narratives and things like that, which kind of remind me of some Plot Twisters things. There's been a lot of updates in Plot Twister land, because that's, for those who don't really know or haven't been following, like they won a major grant. They were a grand prize winner for an open idea grant, and it's kind of taking the project from ideas into more funded, into what do we want to do with the money, into this escalation of like responsibility and making more structure more formal, because it's that delicate process of kind of a collection of ideas towards functioning organization, and being a part of that has been interesting. I'm doing something called convergent facilitation right now, which is sort of a practice of sorting out. It feels a bit like in a tropey dramatic sense. It feels like the process of writing the Constitution or Declaration of Independence. Like this, you get people coming together to try to create some structure for how to do things in a future sense. And it's very much a sense of like, this will mostly affect the people that come after you. Like it's very much with this in mind that it's not really going to be us doing some of the work, or that some of the folks there may know, like this is the founding person with this idea, but others may not be. They may not be around in other sense, but like, what's the vision of what we're trying to do? So there's a lot going on with that, which is good. My personal work situation has been good, and having a little more time to do other things again, which has been great compared to the last 2 months. There's been a lot of, I did a few other things here. Let me check the Slack. There's obviously a bunch of Cognition Futures stuff too, which has been very exciting. There's been some progress on the methods project, and oh yeah, I reached out to a couple people in the like Neurotech space, and oh, I also did a hold on a second here. Weird. Sorry. So I guess I should backtrack to New York Celebration of Women in Computing. So we have our abstract, but also I'm kind of a volunteer organizer, and I made a New York Celebration of Women in Computing channel, and I just named my in Slack, and I mentioned that because there was a put a call for involvement out. I know Hussein responded, and some other people kind of mentioned, but there's a call for involvement to potentially just be not really heavily involved moderators, but we'll probably have a slight. We're trying to get the conference to have a little more of a virtual space. They're kind of beholden to Slack right now, but just people to kind of be in Slack and kind of help other people. It's not a huge conference by any means. I think there were like less than 200 people there last time, but there's a lot of it people who are early career researchers, undergraduate students who are not very familiar with a lot of things. So having some people there who are a little versed in online interactions and are kind of the community and values that we have might be helpful. So a potential call for involvement would be, I think, 2 days in April if people want to help out with that or some other things. I'm kind of the headline is potential for some volunteer opportunities and some help could be used for that in April, but we'll know more. That's not really an urgent thing. It'll be sorted out in the next couple of weeks. So I'm helping out as an organizer of that event, and I think I'm going to particularly stress. Let's make sure there's some virtual space people can interact with, because that's a big deal, especially for younger folks, but also as someone who I especially when I was less familiar with things, I did most of my networking and connection online or not face to face, because I was shy or inexperienced. I didn't know what to say, or had an idea and didn't think about how do you say it in the moment. If you have an online space, it's much easier to do that, or find kind of a discussion prompts to give people who are in that unsure space. Okay, well, your ideas are welcome to put them here. I think that's something I'm trying to promote a bit more in the conference setup right now. So a little bit of insight into that. Yeah, so that's a bunch of Nickwich stuff. Ankit has mentioned being involved in that. They also mentioned they may be doing some other things in the future, so they may not be as around. But they did mention he's interested in that. That also, Aiden, one of the interns, has expressed some interest in all of those things too, and they've talked. I don't think Aiden's here today, or may not be here today, but Aiden and Ankit have. We need to get Angela, Avery, and Amanda, and the other ones, and just have the A team as part of the event. I'm saying that because kind of 1 or 2 years ago, it was a bunch of A, it was all A names except me. So A part 2 or so anyway. What other things that? I'll do Cognition Futures and then a little bit of a small Jopro update as well. Cognition Futures, the reading group itself is still kind of finishing up Fuchs, and I'm getting increasingly a little more ambitious about I wanna kind of do due diligence with that, but I feel I think the evolution of the meeting is coming along nicely, because we have had quite a bit more project management and development focus recently, and that's been great. But also, I feel I'm kind of envisioning the structure of some of our weekly meetings as project management or like project updates for the methods project, which is fleshing out, and then almost like kind of like what Bradley does with his end of the week, end of the meetings here with the paper dives. But I think it would be really nice to kind of intentionally put a little bit of a moment into that for like a much reduced version where people spend 1 or 2 minutes, like kind of literally 1 or 2 minutes, not even a flash talk, but just a small preview to mention something ideally it's something you can put into the bibliography for the project, but even if it's not super project related, just like something where we get a little bit more flow, because I like having one main text, but I'm considering having a little bit more like variety of discussion, especially now that we're coming up to an end with Fuchs. I think that would shake things up a bit, or even have like a more asynchronous component to it. Like, even if it's just like literally a reference of, Amanda or Brian or Hussein or whoever intern mentioned this paper in the chat and wrote these 3 lines of review about it. Let's check it out later or whatever. Some segment where there's sort of a little bit more going on there. But I want, that's a little experimental, but I feel like I want to keep the reading group as a, I've been thinking about that too. I don't know if people want to do that or not. But like, I really, I appreciate seeing that in the chat, because it's like, I really like the flow of it, and I don't want to lose the deep dive context of it. I feel like that's super special in a sense, but also I want to really center the project work that we have done a lot of work on, but like outside of saying I want to center the project work, centering the project work, I think will look a bit like the other thing that I'm talking about too. So I'm still kind of playing out how to do that, but we have to have, we kind of, to kind of say this for the people who weren't there recently, we've kind of realized that the next step is basically going to be like, we have a bit of an understanding that we're going to have to basically annotate and read a bit more to get some of our descriptive sub-project down, and that will turn into some of our prescriptive or theory building, and that will turn into some of the evaluatory aspect of the project. And it's sort of a cycle, like the evaluation will affect the descriptive, like they will all be interrelated into feeding back to each other. So we've kind of come to a place where, like, well, at this point, we can develop some frameworks and some ideas for this, but a lot of it's just churning out the readings and putting, okay, here's some of like the raw material that we're processing through our system, and what we're getting as we process it is, here's a home domain, here's the philosophical underpinning, here's the method, how is the method and the underpinning tied to each other, like getting to that process, and like not just sort of like we can, like, you can theoretically do like top down versions of that, but like through our own work here is us putting the raw material through our process, and then so that's kind of like the requirement. That's basically where we're at in it, if that makes sense. So as part of that, I do want to continue the deep dive, especially for like a book like Fuchs. I think is a great thing to do the deep dive on. But I'm kind of seeing the project, and maybe we'll structure some things that will be intentionally asynchronous or not. Like I don't know, but like as it stands, the latest evolution is leading with project time, one deep dive book, and I'm kind of playing with the smaller updates that we maybe don't do a deep dive on, that are very small, like paper or reference material summaries, either as part of the project or separately. And I'm excited to see people say they would be interested in potentially having like longer meetings or adjusting that or whatever. We can talk more about that later, maybe later in this meeting, but like that's a discussion that I'm very interested in. And also I want to like kind of mention more to the interns, because I think some people are interested but they don't know they can join it yet. So if you're an intern or someone checking out the lab and you're interested in anything you've seen on the Cognition Futures page, which
Yeah. So we have someone new here. I think they're joining by phone. Would you like to introduce yourself, or? And that's the link to the Jopro.
yeah, that's the main. If anybody's interested in like background about what we're talking about, you can kind of see a little bit there, but there's actually quite a bit more that is on that page about the methods project. So yeah, I don't know the phone number necessarily. Oh, I think I might. Okay. I don't know if they want to talk right now, or they're just listening.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm driving, so I can't talk right
Oh,
now.
okay.
It's good to be here with everybody.
Oh, hi. How are you?
Okay.
It's Erin, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so let's see. Sorry, there's dogs in the background. But yeah, I've made a new page. You can see in the methods project channel. There's an annotated bibliography section. I updated it a little bit. Oh, I wanted to say, like, if you want to contribute something to it, anybody can contribute to it. I would say maybe probably like ask to talk to me about like some of the context, because there's stuff here that I'm not able to convey that may affect things, but like I want to be very like, the more we have people looking at stuff, the better. But don't worry about like putting it in the database. Like you can just honestly, you can just put a review in the Slack channel. Like I can format it in Notion, and I can format on the page, format in the specific database, which is, there's a specific way of doing that, and it's a little clunky. So I don't want putting things in a Notion to be a barrier for anybody. But like if you want to review an item and you can, want to kind of contribute to the annotation project, or as part of the project, just reach out to me if you have any questions. So yeah.
Yeah, we might work on ways to make that a little bit easier. Like, I mean, it might work when there are like one or two things, but like when people get to 50 or 100, it's going to be, I mean, just on your end, formatting it or having all these things in the Slack channel. I don't know. I don't know what the best way to do it is, but you should think about that a little bit. How to
Well, yeah, and like that's I would, if it gets to a place where it scales up and there's a lot of involvement, that'll be great. I honestly don't see that happening at all.
Well, I mean, no, it's an aspirational thing. It's like,
Yeah.
because I mean, it's actually quite a practical thing if you have a lot of submissions, because it's easier to have it like where we can just get it in a certain format. You fill in the fields and then it goes right into the database. Otherwise, people are submitting things with incomplete citations, and you have to figure out what to do. And take it from me, I've done something like that in the past where it just gets too much. Yeah.
I think creating a form in that sense might be good. I was a little concerned we were gonna. I think I had this moment of like not regret, but like prior to anybody who's watching this video, almost certainly being in the lab or being involved in the lab, I'd spent so many times like sorting out stuff in like GitHub and GitHub updates and these other like heavily. It wasn't a waste of time, but it was just like like
Oh yeah.
really cumbersome stuff that was I cut a lot of my teeth, as they say, just weird expression, but like learned on and just like all this aspirational work. And I was like, So I think I had a flashback to that. Getting a form, like, hey, use this link, input your simple Google form, whatever everybody knows,
Right.
or type form or something. Like, that is definitely something we should do.
Yeah, automation is usually the key to that, but sometimes you have to manage the automation, and it's it's like the things that we usually do to manage like the meetings and that, and it's a lot of the meeting just seems like it's you just show up, but like there's a lot of technical detail to getting everything set up and
does anybody know, and I think you can kind of do this with Google Forms, but I actually wanted to combine like if it was as easy as like GitHub sort of pull requests or review stuff. I'm curious if there's a form situation that sort of has a form entry that I could basically examine as if it was a pull request, and then that would decide like, okay, here's an editing stage where we can edit it, and then we can say yes, and then once I hit yes, it's totally submitted into the final format, which I kind of wanted to be Notion, but maybe it could at least just be like a CSV that feeds into Notion or something like that, like the database itself. I'm curious, that's more of like an actual technical administration process, and I'm not sure. I've never looked at technologies. I never looked at a form technology that specifically does that. So maybe people here know about one, or we can look for one. But,
I mean, I know that like on GitHub you can make a form for issues. So you can create issues, and then pull requests are just simply like, I mean, that's like a step where you just put it into a document, but it's not going to put it into your Notion document. As far as I know, you can't interface Notion directly with a GitHub repo, although it could be wrong. But there's probably some way to do this. Google Forms would work too, because that gives you like, I don't know if you can bring that directly into a spreadsheet, but that might work. There are different ways you can do it, yeah.
Like my immediate solution that I know would be partial solutions right now would be like Google Form, which puts into a sheet, and you just use the sheet as like your review stage, and then you can like export versions of the sheet to Notion. Like I know that could happen, but I'm curious if there's like a slightly cooler or better way to do it. This will be very good to create.
Yeah, I think that's great. Not worth rolling our own. Yeah, it's probably not great to. But I mean,
it's possible. Is it worth it?
Well, yeah, I think the idea is just to use like a set of tools that we put together. I mean, it's there are better solutions, like things you can get a subscription to, but it's kind of hard.
There's a pretty highly rated thing called Form to Notion, which takes Google Forms and puts it into a Notion table. Apparently, I just saw. So I'll check that out.
Okay.
But yeah, I would. Yeah, I don't want to. I'm glad to talk about this, but I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with that. Suffice to say, the whole Cognition Futures endeavor is taking a bit more shape, and it's fun. There's a related component to it that I feel I kind of can't see beyond like the 1st or 2nd of February right now, because there's just so much today, tomorrow, the next day that I'm completely bound to doing. But in that time space of the future in the magical future where deadlines are not like the heavy clouds pressing down upon you, and like you can do things, which may or may not ever come into existence. But in that space, like there's the frontier map project in and of itself is not dead and gone. It's just I think a goal for myself this year is to basically put it into a preprint. Like I think that should happen, and I think that could happen maybe in the spring. But yeah, that's the thing. I think that's most of the wide-ranging updates for other lab-related stuff. I'm excited about upcoming Google Summer of Code things. That's great. Only thing I'll say about Jopro is, I mean, I participated in a storytelling challenge with like Plot Twisters in another group that we kind of know and are friends with. It's like called like the Honest Majority, and they're a quirky experimental group that's, I think they were like originally named like Make Truth Matter Again or something like that, and they were like a group that Angela is a part of, and maybe it's like an offshoot from that group actually. I don't. There's so many like. I'm kind of involved in this funny space of people being semi-entrepreneurial about ideas, and the projects sort of bubble up, and you know, it's one of those things. But I was involved in a storytelling contest a while ago. Like as a judge, it was kind of interesting, artistic, expressive thing. But that went well, and that's, I think they're announcing the winners now, or have. I'm not entirely sure. And I mentioned Plot Twisters stuff already, and for Jopro, I am interested in doing a little bit more work with them. There's talk about some fellowships that I'll mention a bit more later. There's, I have a few people that I'm like doing more, like the Jopro mentoring stuff is happening, and I'm happy with where that's going. I feel like I think on a personal note, I'm pretty happy with like the creation of Jopro. It's not totally formalized yet, and I think I'll make it into something. It's interesting because Plot Twisters is going through like a formal like development process as an organization, or there's this incorporated entity and stuff like that. And I don't know what Jopro is going to be in that sense, but it's been very interesting to see that come through. And I'm just really happy with what Jopro, in conjunction with the lab and Plot Twisters and other things, has become this sort of it's serving a role that I really wanted to have, because it's not bound the same way the lab is to the lab's sort of mission and what it can do and can't do. But I feel like it's doing this really good intermediate helping role, and that's exactly what I wanted it to be. And it's just I continue to, you know, I'm happy about that. And there's work going on, that some things I can't say right now, some things I'll say more soon about. But it's good. And yeah, I've been poking a little bit around in Neurotech stuff. I heard from Morgan. I really want to catch up with him, but I think he's been a little bit MIA. I've asked around in Neurotech X Slack too, and he's not there, so I'm sure he's busy with something. But I did make a few contacts in that space too. I made two new recent contacts of interest. One of them being a neuroethics. Is she a lawyer? I forget, but someone in neuroethics space. Well, that's weird. neurolaw and neuroethics. So that's a really cool thing about that. I've also been in touch a little bit with Valeria, who is sort of an OG member of the ethics team. She was like the first ethics collaborator that we had way back in the day. And I know she has some positive updates about some stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know if she'll be like doing anything with us directly. I kind of want her. She may help out with some of the Nickwich stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's new. And then I also met someone recently who does a lot of like there's two people like basically in like the DEI community, like diversity,
Oh, yeah.
inclusion, that I've been like talking to recently, and some maybe more directly related to society, ethics, tech or not. Oh geez, I lost everybody. Okay, now I'm back here. One of them had a really interesting discussion about like they're involved with like application processes to a major like university here and what that's like, and interesting story with that. The second, I may invite someone to the lab space just to get familiar with Slack and some of the things we're doing here. They won't be doing research necessarily, but the kind of a sort of an intern or mentee capacity through Jopro and all this stuff. And I'm not incredibly sure what's going to happen with that yet, but it wouldn't really affect any of the day-to-day things here. I may talk to forthcoming conversation with Riley about that, because it'd be kind of a unique situation. Also speaking about kind of loose ends, did that person from LinkedIn ever reach out to you, Brandon?
Yeah, I may have yesterday. I have. I think the email was in my inbox, and
That's fine.
I'll check back. Yeah.
Someone reached out to me on LinkedIn about a lab, and they were like undergraduate from I think somewhere in Europe or somewhere else, and wanted to, were curious and had a little bit of a chat and that kind of a thing. But yeah, I don't know what's going to come from that. I think they were a potential intern person who just reached out. So okay, yeah, that was a whole bunch of different things that I mentioned. So,
yeah.
But it's just like I'm doing like the lab manager hat, the Cognition Futures hat, the internship hat, all the hats. So I think that's most of my updates, but I can elaborate on anything if need be.
Well, I think we can do a lot of that offline. Looking forward to people who might be joining the group. So we'll keep checking back. And Jopro, yeah, we should talk more about Jopro in a more formal way later. We can maybe, I don't want to force you to build an org chart or anything, but to kind of have an idea of what you want to get out of it and what kind of role it plays. It sounds like it's going to be a supporting role for a lot of the mentorship things, and so just to have like an idea of where that's going, and it might be educational to other people to see how these kind of organizations work. So yeah, I mean that's something we can revisit later.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Oh, did we have any other comments before I move on, or questions? Okay.
Just I just wanted to say on a personal note, like I'm super excited about pretty much everything, which is amazing. But I'm really excited about Nickwich, and I'm really, really thankful and excited that like the energy behind Cognition Futures has been really good, and I like the way people have been kind of staying with it through the project and pushing, like wanting to see it develop, like that's super cool. That's something that I feel like that's really amazing for me to experience as someone who kind of had an idea about it like a long time ago, and now it's a thing that people care about. Wow, like that. So, and I want to say that like that's awesome, and thank you for the people for that. But also like, I want to very clearly say, and this is for interns or new people or people who aren't sure what to do in the lab or want to do in the lab, is that don't take what currently is being talked about in the lab as the only thing that ever will be talked about in the lab, particularly in a project sense. If you have the desire to build out a project or even explore the seeds, and then maybe like I really want to emphasize this because it's so important to realize I didn't years ago when I joined the lab, like 2019, when I joined the lab in 2019, the idea of a cognitive science methods related project was not even unfathomable. Like the roots of that word didn't exist in my mind, really, like barely. The idea of having Cognition Futures as a group with its own like website or like, oh, there's a project banner, not barely fathomable. So I don't want to. It's hard to really explain, and I think maybe I should write something or do like a video specifically about this for everything, because I think this is a major thing for the lab, for people to understand in the lab, is that in time and through development, you can use the lab to develop a project and like recruit people to it if you want to do it.
Yeah.
Like all the things that we talk about now didn't really exist until someone chose them to bring them into it. Some of them were Bradley's projects, like the Google Summer of Code is this kind of its own thing, but like representational brains and phenotypes group, which we don't name that as much, but that's like foundational to so much what we do. The Brain Root Vehicle project, we don't talk about that anymore, but that came into existence or being able to work on it, right? And then there's these other things that have happened, like some of the VR emphasis has been kind of that's a major thing for Bradley, and it's been like waves or some winters and summers of how much that's been talked about. Like just because I'm kind of talking about this project as if it's a major thing, I think the perspective that I have that others don't or new people don't is realizing like this mostly happens because I thought about it so much and fussed about it and fooled around with it and stumbled around with it long enough that it materialized into something. And that's something that anybody can do if they want to do it. Like there's obviously limitations to the lab and limitations to what we can interdisciplinarily manage, but there's a lot of room for that. And I think maybe that would be a great thing to either write. We've talked about it, but we never like, oh, here's this like oral like tag trademark, blog post or video about it. I think that'd be a major thing, and that's something we should do in the future. So that's my small soapbox about that. But that's an amazing part, and maybe one of the most powerful things about this lab and this group and why research in the community is the way it is, because you can't do that. Like a lot of places, there's so many barriers to that happening, and people disinterested in that happening. There's very strong gatekeeping and rails of the tracks that the train has to go down in a very specific way. And some places are better, but anyway, enough about that. I'm very happy that a lot of things have developed, but also Bradley and myself, I don't want to speak for both of us, but I kind of am here. Like, we definitely want other people to sow their own seeds and have their own cultivations and blooms and harvests of projects that they want to do too. So that's always available. not just like the things that I talk about that I'm specifically interested in. So the end.
All right. That's great. So I guess that's a good lead into the thing I'm going to talk about, which is sort of this week's version of the project management course. So last week I showed the first 2 lectures. Those were kind of the introduction. And then now I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to talk about this week what happened. Let's see, that's it. All right, so this is the working open unit. So this is unit 1. I envision this to be a 3-week unit. So the first week we talked about some of the introductory aspects of working open, and this relates to what we do in the lab here, which is we learn how to work open, we learn how to work in a transparent way, but also in a way that allows you to work, remotely in distributed teams, and also have like a project that you can pass off to different parts of it to different people, and it all works. It doesn't necessarily work seamlessly, but that's why I'm doing this course in part because I want to teach people some of these methods and ways of doing things. So this is so what we did. One of the first things we did this week was to go through a GitHub tutorial, and so I wasn't sure, like the course that I'm teaching in person, I wasn't sure how many people used GitHub before I started planning the course. So it turns out that a lot of people know how to use GitHub, or at least maybe have an account, but not a lot of people are very familiar with some of the details of using GitHub. And so this is why I put together this tutorial. Just kind of like go through some of the ways you can use GitHub. You can use it from the command line. You can download a desktop version of GitHub that allows you to develop from your home machine and, put it, send things into the cloud, send things into the GitHub onto the servers at GitHub so that you can distribute the code. So I can work on some code on my home machine, and I can then issue a pull request to the collective code base. So I can do a lot of things with GitHub, but I did the tutorial from the web interface for GitHub, which is interacting directly with the cloud, with the code base, and committing things there, issuing pull requests, and so forth. So I kind of went through what is Git, which is interesting because Git is a version control system, but it's not the first version control system. There are many version control systems before this. There was originally, I guess it solved a problem. Linus Torvalds, who was the developer of Unix originally, was working on some of his Linux kernel development, and he found that he was using at the time what was a proprietary tool, and that tool cost money as you scaled up. So as you had more contributors, you were paying more out to use the tool, and the tool, of course, it was proprietary, so you only had a fixed set of things that you could do with it. So, this is a problem that we run into all the time with tools. And we were just talking about this with respect to rolling our own. It does take some effort to roll your own. On the other hand, you get a solution that is sometimes flexible and serves your needs, and you maybe don't have to pay for it. So this was something that he developed, Git. It was an alternative to concurrent version systems that existed at the time. There's an open protocol, free to use and develop as you need to. And every Git directory and every computer. So my local computer has a bunch of repositories that I can use, or if I have my own account in the cloud, every account has a full-fledged repository with history and version tracking abilities, and this is independent of a central server. So I don't have to rely on a centralized server to do a lot of these functions. I can do them on my distributed branch or my distributed fork. And so Git forms the core of GitHub, but it's not the only Git-based system. So there are things like GitLab, other types of things that use Git, And then there are other types of version control. If you're interested in like authoring text, or if you're interested in developing images, then that's something you can work with as well. So this goes through forking and the basics of version control, going through forking and how that works and how it's important for like founding like a section of the project. So like forking is basically where I have a main project and I take a copy of it and I pull it aside and I say, this is my personal copy. And I'm going to be able to develop that copy the way I see fit. And then everything is going to be tracked so I can understand what is happening with that copy. I can bring other people into collaborating on this copy, and I can do all the things I could do with the main version, but it's just like a fork. And then the benefit of forking then is you can bring those things back together later and you can incorporate them into the main version. So I talk a little bit about some of the things that you can do with setting up a repository. This is my figure for version control, basically stressing this idea of forking. And sometimes, people have two different approaches to this. Sometimes people like to make forks as ways to develop. And sometimes people like to make branches. And the fork versus branch controversy isn't like that important. What's important is the structure of taking a copy of it, whether it be a fork or a branch, taking it for your own use, making customized changes, and then critically incorporating it back into the main version. So like sometimes people will create branches for development, for release, for testing, and they'll do things to these branches that are, maybe experimental. Maybe they make a branch so they can see if they can kill the program. There are all sorts of things people do with branches, and then they just can basically merge them back into the master later. So you have like a branch for, say, like I want to test to see, I want to do a specific set of tests with this branch, but I don't want to interfere with what's going on in the main version. So I can do that, and I can merge that branch back in later, or I can just kill it. It's up to you. So this is the idea of customizability, and then also being able to push things back into the main version when you want. So that makes for a very flexible development environment. And again, it's not something that is unique to code. You can do this with other things. You can do this with writing books. There's something called Gitbook, for example. There are other types of things that people use GitHub for that where this model is actually very helpful. So I went through edit histories and the history of files and the history of organizing these things. I went through some tutorials where I kind of walked them through, like looking at the history of a document. So this is the history of a markdown file. You can restore old versions. You can look at the changes. You can view all those things, and they're actually quite useful for understanding if something goes wrong, where things went wrong. Also talked about branching and merging. These are like strategies for doing this. I just wanted to get people used to this idea and used to how some of the strategies you might use for managing these repositories. Because, when you're just a collaborator, it's one thing to kind of work with the stuff and barely understand it. But when you're actually managing a repository, and this would be like something for a project like Cognition Futures. How would we build a repository, say, that put things into one of these, have a collection of files that we understand the structure of how they're, the dependencies between them, the history of the files, and how do we, use that and manage all that information. It's not an easy thing. It's actually quite hard especially if you have like 10 people all contributing to it at once. So this is a very this kind of system makes this a lot easier, makes this a lot more tractable. Just giving various different examples of these things. I went through pull requests, how to do a pull request. There's a best practices, which I usually don't follow, by the way. It's unfortunate, but but there are certain ways you can enforce best practices, And this is one place where you can do that. You can do that with pull requests, where you would make a change to a file. And I actually did a tutorial in the class where you make a change to a file, and when it doesn't match, then you can issue a pull request, leave a comment, you hit merge pull request, and it sends the request to the person who's managing the repository. Then that person can reject or accept it depending on what they feel needs to be done, if anything. So what happens with a lot of pull requests is that they either get accepted as is, or you can have a conversation with someone, with like a maintainer or with a reviewer, and they can tell you kind of what to do. So if you make a change and you don't know where to go from there, you can ask the maintainer through a pull request system, what's the next, I did this change, what's the next step? And they might tell you, okay, this looks good, but you need to make these changes because these dependencies are broken. So then I go back and I make the changes, and I go back and I say, these are done. And I was thinking about this other thing that might be good for improving this file, this code, and then the maintainer will tell you if that's a good idea. So there are ways to have conversations in the pull request domain where it's directly related to the thing you're trying to change. So these are good ways, good like means of practice, I guess, just kind of going through. And then task and issue management is where we talk about tasks and issues in GitHub. But tasks and issues are generally good for project management because it allows you to state things in a certain quantity of an idea and put a number on it and track it. So what I mean is, like, a lot of these issues you see in this example are just like little bits of things that need to be done in a project. Sometimes they're big ideas like model selection. Sometimes they're specific figures. Sometimes they're like, some analysis that needs to be done. Now, those are 3 different scales of doing something, right? You have like this analysis, which probably has about 10 moving parts. Model selection, which has a lot of moving parts. And then the figures, which are a very specific thing that you would have to address. So I'm going to go through this later in the course, the details of a lot of this, how to sort of scale things, right? Find the right scale for your issues to make them effective. But that's not something we're going to talk about in this set of lectures. Just kind of touching on it as a first pass. And then kind of how to manage this on a Kanban board, moving cards and reviewing them in meetings. We don't do that in this meeting at all, really, anymore. We used to do this in some of the smaller meetings, but really, if you're working on a specific project, specific set of issues, this makes sense. To review something like a Kanban board, to move things around, to say, this needs to be done, this has been done, this has yet to be done. And then kind of going over version control in a bit more detail. And then I also have, these are slides from another place. So they're kind of like, I've done these tutorials in the past, and I'm just trying to bring these into the course. But there's this other platform called Open Science Framework. And this is a different setup from GitHub. This is where you manage academic projects, and you manage files like PDF files and doc files, and you can manage project components like papers or sub-projects, and you can put them into place here. And this works through a web interface, so it's very much oriented towards like academic work more than code. You can integrate GitHub into this, but it's usually for academic collaborators writing papers and keeping notes and having these project level things where you have a project and you have sub-projects. They might be papers, they might be presentations, they might be other things, but you can, there's a way to do version control and manage things through this as well. So this is different than GitHub. You have a fork function here. You have the ability to invite collaborators. So there are things that are Git-like in Open Science Framework, but it's different. And so I bring that example out because it gives you a little bit different take on this stuff. So this is something that you can do not just for code, but for other things as well. And you can go back to previous versions and restore them as needed in this environment as well. And then the next set of things I talked about in this lecture, actually I kind of had like not a lot of time left after that. So I started in about governance. So this is something we talked about today, going from version control to governance. And the reason I made that leap and it's not really a leap, was because governance is tied to this sort of version control. So if you want to govern your collaborative community, governance is a hard problem. And we do this all the time in like government, but also in social groups to try to make sure that people follow certain rules. There are a certain set of norms. There are some power relations that don't get violated. There are all these things that we need to do to make a community run smoothly. And so this kind of walks through from this sort of technologically mediated aspect of governance, which is version control. It's very subtle, to more sort of ideational aspects of governance. So, one of the technologies, of course, is version control, but another version of governance is authority control. And authority control is where you have these systems where you have like controlled vocabularies. So in Wikipedia, they have something called a disambiguation page, which is where you have disambiguation of a single term or phrase, or in this case, the letter Z. It can refer to a lot of things. And if you're in Wikipedia and you look up Z, you might mean like a movie or a band or a book. And you could specify that, but most people just search for the term. And you'll get to this disambiguation page because we have to know kind of what level what you're talking about. So when people create a stub here, they have to define what version of Z they're talking about, right? And this is just one example, but you can do this for all sorts of things. Now this looks a little bit weird, like why does this have to relate to governance? But it relates to governance in that you keep things organized. It's a way to enforce norms of like organizational norms, sort of the norms of using certain words and phrases in the same way across the project. So these are all things that are governance. And, there are also things to do with governance that involve argumentation and coming to a consensus on how to do things the best way. So a lot of times people will use argument maps, which are where you have a contention, you have a problem, and you have different people give arguments for it. And they have to have a reason, they have to have evidence, they have to make these logical steps. And the thing about it is if you're all sitting in a room, you can do this fairly easily. But if you're not all sitting in a room and you have like people in different places and different time zones, maybe at different points in time, people join the project 6 months from now or a year from now, they need to know why something exists, what the reasons were. And, it's institutional knowledge that gets put into a concrete form. And so argument maps are one way to do that. But it's important to have these like collective decisions. You have a reason for them, to understand why the reason exists or why you did something a certain way. And at some point, things change. And to have that history there is critical. It's like with version control, having a history of a document, knowing what changes were made and why. It's the same thing with governance. And then I gave an example from Wikipedia. So that's lecture 3. And then lecture 4 is, it continues with governance. I had some examples of cloning a software repository, which I didn't cover in the original tutorial, talking about teams. This is an example of our teams from Orthogonal Lab, which we don't use much anymore, but I know that exists. I looked it up. and there may be some interesting things to revisit here with respect to teams. Just having these things that we've focused on in the past and revisiting them. I don't think we did a lot of stuff in the teams, but it's been rather static. Oh, we had yeah. So yeah, that's something. Let's see if we have some things in the chat. Yeah. Okay, Hussein had to leave. Thanks, Hussein. Jesse had a question here. Has anyone used Gitbook before? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have, but not in a very deep way.
Mhm.
Do you think OSF would be good for Cognition Futures, or should we wait to be more developed before using something like that? I forgot about OSF that way. Well, I use OSF personally, and I use it for different projects. We could use it if we had we could use it for Cognition Futures, I guess. It would be, it's a certain level of if you have papers that you want to make public, but also work on things in the future and have all that in one place, that would be a good place to do that. It's just different from GitHub in that it stresses more some of these artifacts, like we talk about creating artifacts. If you have those and then you're building more, that's where the focus of that is.
Yeah, it's tricky because there's sort of there's a desire for I think that's the there's a desire to make some structure, but also it's kind of do I make structure before we develop things more, or do I make the structure first to develop them within that structure?
Yeah.
I'm kind of a little impasse about that, but it's just whatever evolves first in some sense.
That's something I might cover in maybe next week. It's like the chicken or egg problem.
Yeah.
Which evolutionarily we all know the eggs came first, right? But in this case, it's like, do you build stuff out, or do you get people involved and then build out? And you have to do a little bit of both. You have to build something there, and then as you get more people, you get your projects change. You can adopt more tools. But I've been stressing this thing about tools, where tools are sort of, you can spend your entire time worrying about tools and building tools, or adopting and learning tools, but you don't want to make the barrier to entry too high on tools. You just want to do what you need to do your work. You don't want to get hung up on tools. But that's all,
Yeah. Can you actually go back one slide just to have this is a bit of a random comment. So, or the one with the teams on it or whatever.
Oh yeah, this one.
The GitHub teams. So I present this to both people here and in the future. There was a time where I think this is the organization view or something, but I was super big on get into GitHub, build a team, do this stuff, and use the project management in there and create issues and create tasks. And we don't do that currently anymore.
Right.
Do people want, and this is sort of a broad comment, but do people, and for Cognition Futures specifically, but also other things too, do people want anything like that again? I like the idea, and I may incorporate that a bit into other things that I personally like using GitHub, but it's clunky to get into and out of, and if you're not in GitHub all the time, it may not be as appealing.
Right.
So I don't know how Brian or Amanda feel about that, or others who would be interested in who are pushing some of the projects forward specifically. We can do that, and I don't know if that's something. I think in the past, even with the proto intern program, we kind of oh, well, here's your intro to GitHub. That was a takeaway we tried to give more specifically of interfacing with GitHub. And I don't know, I know I'm interrupting Bradley's discussion right now, but I feel like that's something that I kind of want to bring up to people just to see what they say, or take an instant survey, people have ideas.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Would you want to, well, if you can you're familiar with GitHub to some extent, Brian, but like, would you want to, if you go back to the screen basically that you had, would you want to have a view like this, or like if you go like the projects again, like would you want to would you be interested in using GitHub? Would you be interested in, basically would you be interested in having project management for Cognition Futures or other projects, but mainly that based in GitHub and something we actively use in GitHub as opposed to not in GitHub? I get my question is for like for Amanda, Brian, or other people who are interested and want to be involved in projects. If we use a project management tool, is there sort of a GitHub? Is it strong yes or a strong no? Or like I'd rather use other things that aren't based on having to log into GitHub and use that platform.
I think the most important thing is to pick one and keep using it.
Yeah.
Because right now there's such a proliferation of tools. Like for example, when we shifted to Notion, it took me like a couple months to even get used to the idea of using it for anything. So I would say no. Just stick with what we got. Don't do anything else. Doesn't seem necessary. I just want to do the work.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was getting at with the tools. You don't want to make the barrier to entry too high because you want to get your work done. You want to make it transparent, especially to contributors. And the management aspect of it, you can do like, you can play with tools and get them to work right. And then, if it's like something that is easy to, the workflow is easy, like getting into it, it's, and then you might use this for like certain things. Like there might be specific cases like, the forms for putting things into a database. You might actually use this for something. There are different ways you can use things, but I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole.
No.
Just suffice it to say that like you can use them in different ways, but you don't want to make them obtrusive. And that's kind of the thing I've been like, I keep repeating to the students is that, that's what you really have to think about. And no one gets this right. And the same thing about a governance. So governance is really about, coordinating between collaborators, making things work seamlessly. And one of these things, of course, we don't really use this much in the lab, but there, codes of conduct can be very valuable for sort of establishing sort of the values of the community, but also as like an ethics benchmark. And a lot of times in open source communities, you have a license, you have a lot of people from different backgrounds, you have people with, different, modes of interaction. So having laying out all of the things that you need to, the sort of the norms for interaction are important. It's important for encouraging general compliance across the organization for basic minimal standards of behavior, but also for just ethical standards, conduct standards, and then you can version this. There are templates that you can use. So there's like the contributor covenant, which gives a template, and you can modify it as you need. And this is really about risk mitigation for misconduct. And so there are a couple of examples of things that might be problems for an organization if they don't have like a strong set of principles. For one, Richard Stallman is generally a toxic individual. I don't want to say too much about it, but he was kicked out of the Free Software Foundation at one point, and for violating their code of conduct. And then he returned to the Free Software Foundation. And so this is, as they put it, a costly return, because he was, it's kind of like when you're that toxic, or when you do things that are run afoul of the, the flow of projects and things like that, it can be a problem. And sometimes, contributors will vote with their feet. They'll say, I don't want to be a part of this project anymore. Or the board members might, it might blow up your board of directors. And so that's not something you want. There are also things like appropriating, things, cultural identities and other things. So like with the Apache Foundation, I just found this out recently that I didn't think about it too much. And then that the Apache Foundation is not something from the Apache Nation. It's something that someone came up with And then they said, well, there's this way of software development that is the Apache way. But it isn't really the Apache way, it's just something they term that. And then they copyrighted the name Apache, so it's kind of like the Apache Nation isn't really involved in this. And so, this is misrepresenting the project. Maybe it's pissing off people from the nation because, it's like if I took Italian and I copyrighted it and I said this is the Italian way. And I mean, people would be pretty upset about that. It's like you don't want to take like specific identities and appropriate them for your project or, do things like that. So that's another thing that can be, you have to think about. And this is actually goes beyond a code of conduct in terms of like, how do you present your project to the world? Finally, there are ways about like handling harassment in open source. Open source has a problem with harassment, sexual harassment, other types of harassment, bullying, things like that. And it's something that you can solve partially with a code of conduct, but not always. And so it's something that is constantly, you don't want to be punitive, but you also don't want to, let it get out of hand because it can impact your involvement in the project or involvement of people, wanting to be a part of it. So, we have these community standards in different organizations, Facebook, Roblox, Wikipedia. They're all different. They all do different things. They all have what they call content creators who are sort of the core of like involvement in these communities. And so these are like community standards, not just for like they're active contributors, but they contribute in a way differently from like, say, programming or, they're creating content, they're putting it on the platform. And then, maybe you don't want certain types of content on your platform. Like child pornography is not allowed, but people, there are different ways that people will create content that might be offensive. It might be a legal problem for the organization. So these are all things that we have to have strong standards up front about. And then, having open standards which allow you to do things openly is important. And this is a little bit different from just having like legal standards or ethical standards because it facilitates this openness. And so there are a lot of ways that governance, you can build that into governance. They're contributing guidelines. I gave an example from Wikimedia, how it motivates people, it rewards people. There's this community, and it's based on content creation. And how do you like kind of keep that community sustainable? And so people have tried different strategies at this. Wikimedia does it one way. There might be groups that do it another way. You have technology stacks, which are like how you build things on technologies, and you have to make decisions about what those are. Sometimes it's a legacy thing where you have like old software languages that you have to put in place. Sometimes software, it's the best language for what you want to do, but you have to make this explicit to people what the technology stack is. And this will change over time as you build your project, but you have to keep this in mind. And this is one of the standards issues that we want to, especially when people are working in different, parts of the world, different backgrounds. You say, if I'm building something, I have like a history of using C++ versus maybe like Python, but I want to build it in Python, but maybe I should build it in C++ to make it more consistent with what we're doing in other parts of the project. Those are all standards and governance issues. And then I did have a section on new technologies and open source. So I talked about GPT, ChatGPT, and the standards, how it's kind of disrupted a lot of organizations, which ChatGPT is an open source platform. So it's interesting how these open source platforms can disrupt legacy institutions or even things like Stack Overflow.
Yeah. I look at that article on the right for sure. I don't know if you posted that in the Slack, but like that's definitely.
They may have, yeah. It's just Nature journal. What people are doing now is they're publishing papers with ChatGPT as an author, and it's like, well, maybe not. Yeah, it's not a great idea. That's maybe an example of abuse of the technology. So, anyways, these are disruptive things. What's even more disruptive is Stable Diffusion. In putting this together, I found that like Stable Diffusion has a lot of forks. It's run by a company, and then they have a lot of forks where people like they'll train the model with data that they scrape off of the internet. They're scraping these images with English captions. They're scraping them from all sorts of places on the internet: DeviantArt, Wikimedia, Flickr. And what you notice about this collection of places where they're scraping data from is that some of these pieces of art have formal licenses that are open licenses, which I talked about I think I talked about this in one of the lectures, making the distinction between some of these licenses, and then some of them don't. They're actually copyrighted under very restrictive rights. And so the problem is that you're taking all these images and treating them as the same and using them for purposes of generating new models. So people, there are a lot of forks of this where people are training it on textures and shadings and all this other stuff, and they're, making this, they're just, contributing to this latent space, which is a statistical summary of the images. But at the same time, you're creating things based on these old images, and so there are a lot of problems you have with licensing. And they operate under these licenses, Creative ML and OpenRail-M, which are very specific to generative models, which I found out is, these are different types of licenses that you use for your what you're making in open source. And so, they have this open source license that sort of specifies some of the governance of, using these kind of models, but you still have a problem because, especially not even with the forks, but with the training regime, that once you release it into the world, you have people who say, well, that looks like my thing. I feel like I have a right to that, or I don't like this. So they have a community of people. It's, something that isn't just like controlled by a centralized group of people. You have a lot of different aspects of, using these kind of models, people modifying them freely. But you still have this issue of copyright infringement, of people feeling like this is not something they want to opt into. So, they're giving people options to opt out of Stable Diffusion. If you're an artist, they'll take your data out of the training set. But still, there are a lot of issues with understanding how the technology works and understanding these legal issues of governance. So, and then I talked about selecting a license. So, there's the Creative Commons license. There's the license I talked about that are licenses that are specific to the generative models. And then so with Creative Commons licenses, these are usually for general content. You have different things that you might want to allow or disallow in reusing data, but still, or reusing whatever you're licensing, but you still have these options that you can choose from. And then you have software licenses, which are, have different conditions on them. So people will choose a software license based on sort of the very specific things they want. If they want to allow people to reuse the product and have a more restrictive license, they might choose, say, like the Apache Software Foundation's license versus like an MIT license, which allows people to sell copies of the software, sub-license it, but not like maybe in a more restrictive way. So there are different like conditions on these licenses. So then I wanted to talk about a little bit about open data, because we have a data science program in the department I'm teaching in. So just talking about going through open data and the FAIR standards and things like stakeholder relations, privacy standards, a formal data strategy. And I stopped there because I didn't have time to get too far into this. But next week, we'll finish open data and talk about other things like Markdown and how to use that effectively, and some other sort of issues to tie up this unit. So I wanted to go over those because I have them in. We have a channel in one of the Discord servers the Big Unfinished Ideas Discord. And this is where a lot of these things will live, where I'll post the slides at the end of every week. And I hope at some point to have discussions about some of these things in that Discord. So if you have questions, go to that Discord and you know, open up a discussion thread. I'd like to see what people think. Okay. Yeah, any questions? I think you have a bunch of comments in the chat here.
Yeah, the first two are just like comments about like I was kind of just asking about GitHub because I didn't really feel a need to go there, but it's like I'm gonna just explicitly say this. I'm very content. There are a whole lot of reasons we moved to Notions, and I know it's not the most user friendly, and I need to update. I've kind of I like partially updated and I stopped and we just did project stuff, and it's like there's ways to make it more user friendly, so I will do that also, especially for like new folks too, like bringing them in there will be a thing. But I do think the form idea will be really helpful for like the annotated bibliography stuff. I think that'll be nice, and it's kind of fun also. You can kind of see, oh, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 30, 40 submissions. You can see, like, count the number and get excited about, like, ooh, we're doing stuff. You know, I think the most appealing thing about GitHub for me was it had a nice way of visualizing some of the work that you're doing, and that's a challenge that I feel that's such a major challenge. Also, is like how do you recognize the hard, like, you know, all the work that happens at the inception level and the first level, and like if people stick around and do a paper or a preprint, that's great. But like this is even harder in some ways to you know to like congeal and solidify all these like loose strands. So how do you do that? And I feel like I do like that about GitHub. It's not functionally viable to do it, but I think I might try to make something in Notion or find some way to, like, I don't know, let people feel like they're seen for doing what they're doing. Right. Outside of that, my last comment was basically saying some of the things you covered would be really good for the Plot Twisters folks to look at, and I might just try to like point them out. Look at you know, this timestamp to this timestamp, because knowing about like some of the identity appropriation stuff, how we're citing things, even the GTP citing that effect, and that I think that would be really relevant to some stuff. So, you know, everybody's would get busy in that group, but the thing to say, hey, look, spend 5 minutes and watch this. I might do that. So thank you for sharing that stuff here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, these are all issues that are going to come up in project management and managing open projects. And I think the generative models are particularly timely because we have a lot of, you know, sort of gray area around that. You just adopt a technology and go use it and have fun, and then all of a sudden you have all these problems that you hadn't anticipated. You know, yeah, I think also this idea of some of this stuff being relevant to like Plot Twisters. I want to make this course so that I can use it. We can use it again. It's under an open license, as I said, Creative Commons. You'll notice on the front page of the slides, there's a Creative Commons license that is put here. I think it's CC BY. So that's, you know, that's why I get into the licensing aspect. But I think also, you know, I would love to talk to Plot Twisters people about this. I think every project should really think deeply about these things, because, you know, there really isn't a lot of guidance. I mean, people just do things, they manage projects, and it's all kind of like, you know, informal shared stuff that people, you know, either you find out about it at some point or you learn on your own, or you don't think about it.
Well, yeah, and like specifically, one thing that I've been thinking about from Plot Twisters, but also this project in general, and like if there's future work on this stuff, like I would be really interested in sort of like I don't know if the word is collaborating might sound a bit strong, but like I would like to develop something based off of what we're talking about, particularly in the context of, I know there are some resources out there about this stuff. It's just I don't know any that kind of cover the way things that we do. But basically, for people when they're starting an organization that's either open science, like open research, or is sort of like public facing or public good done in this way, like one of the really valuable things from this, and up that's sort of for that audience. And then I will say what I'm taking away, and there's a lot of things that I can only say so much, but like the Plot Twisters experience right now is I could very much see how some of the stuff in this would offer a sort of a tentative map, if you will, but a kind of context that people who haven't spent a lot of time managing or developing projects or like organizational infrastructure to think about. And I think having even the most basic reference points and context talked about in the way we are here for people developing things for the first time, the sort of project management, and I guess maybe like one order of magnitude out, or one or two levels up of like in like organization or like macro infrastructure management itself. I don't know what to call that, like organizational design perhaps, or like that kind of stuff. Or like I feel like a component, and I don't know if you go this in your course or not yet, but like a component to what we just talked about might be like how this relates to the broader design of things too, because that's like a big need. And frankly, I'm mentioning Plot Twisters here, but Cognition Futures, Jopro, state-of-the-art AI, many other projects that have come and gone over the years, I know would benefit from that, in the sense that these startup groups are people who love an idea, and they'd be great, but like they don't, the context that they should be aware of. And I'm gonna refer to a generic startup I was a part of, just to say this thing, but like many times people are just totally not aware of a certain really important aspect of operations that they need to be aware of, from both infrastructure or organizational design down to what that is implemented to and organized in a project management operation, administration, management of personnel, projects, resources. Like that's, I know there's writing about it, but I can't really think of any off the top of my mind that I feel I see a need, basically what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think we're addressing something important to that end, or you are in that project, that part of things.
Yeah. It's so I think those are all good points. But yeah, and next week I'm gonna kind of go over a recap of this for the class, just kind of hitting some of the points of this unit. So like going over, I'm just giving a smattering of everything. And the idea, one of the ideas is to get people to think about these ideas and then do their own research to get maybe say, I want to build an organization, I want to build a project based on something I care about. And I'm going to think about these issues. And I'm not going to think about everything, but I'm going to think about a couple of key issues that I want to address in my, I'm having them basically design a project in a community, and I want them to kind of think about some of these issues.
Is that the 10-page paper?
Yeah.
Or is that the
theoretical one? That's what it's going to be.
I think I might actually I won't be able to be super involved until basically after next week.
Yeah.
But or maybe a week and a half. But I want to kind of go through the process. I want to do that myself. I don't know if I'll write a 10-page paper, but I want to go through that because I feel like so many things in my life I'm doing that and then doing a dummy version in a safe space that I can sandbox and talk to other people about would be very useful. So I think I'm going to try to actually do that. I'm not saying
Yeah.
anybody else here has to do that, but I really like personal for myself. I think that would be very valuable. Even if it's like I get to like pseudo test dummy some real life things that are happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
Because like even like just to mention my own like Jopro stuff, like there's this is like the year of like crystallization of a lot of things on many fronts. And then like some of the startup stuff I mentioned before. So
Yeah, you might run through this with Jopro as an example, or with Plot Twisters as an example. Because it's like basically, it's where these things kind of hit the road. Like if you have an idea, you say, I want to create this project, but I want to also deal with some of these governance issues or with licensing, and I have them in a gray area where I don't know if really we know how to do this well.
Yeah.
And that's where you want to get like this worked out, because if you don't, you're going to have problems implementing it.
and the thing is too, and I don't know if you explicitly state this or not, but like this would be also like I would like to write something about this. I don't know if I want to write a post or a blog post or like a lecture or a talk or something. But the thing we're getting at here is really vital is like a bridge from what I said about getting the context is at any point, if you're developing an organization, if you're a founding member or a helper or an advisor, which I'm all of that. I'm a founding member. I'm a lead organizer. I'm also I'm external. I'm an external collaborator on stuff. I'm all layers of like really deep in the weeds, which is like, hey, cool idea, like that's great. Here's, but you may want to pay attention to this. And so I've all different range of it. But what's so like what's really valuable is like there's a language, there's an advocacy, there's a diplomacy aspect to this. And I don't think you're going to get into this here necessarily. Like this is a little more outside this direct scope of the course that you're teaching. But there is an ability, like you have to know the language that you need to steer people towards understanding how to value it. Like how do you advocate values that are not understood? And I mean both like ethical values, but also like straight up communicating and developing and bridging and like kind of justifying why these things matter. Like I'm sure many of us have been in projects, but a startup I have been involved in was created in a way that it was destined to fail because some of these things were never articulated or conceptualized, articulated, or communication in a feedback way were never really made about like key points. And I feel like that is this is like kind of higher level professional development stuff, but for people that are in this space, people that want to do things, people that want to make change or make new things, and you kind of have it's like it to me feels like this is, I'm sure this is kind of thing that like a lot of people like in the venture capitalist startup Y Combinator space talk about, like demo, or this kind of goes back to demo or deploy, deploy or die, demo or die, like that stuff we've talked about in the past too. Like that's all related, but for the context of if you want to help people facilitate or develop projects, which hey, that's a little bit of what Jopro's about. Yeah. Like this is like a really important like getting literacy and fluency in the language of that is a definite X factor in like, I'm gonna say generating value, but like in success, but also like having illiteracy or lack of fluency in that space is like it's bad news. So right. I'll leave it at that. But, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I wanted to move on to some other things that I have here for the some actually things that we've seen and people have posted in. So this is something I posted in, and Amanda was really excited about this because we've talked about this idea during Cognition Futures, that this is an analog computer. So this is an example of an analog computer. We've been talking about analog computation in Cognition Futures and how that differs from digital computation. And so they built this analog computing for the future. So you have some, there are some docs here. There's a first steps PDF. So this is like an open source analog computer, at least in terms of like how to use it. And you can buy it and use it for different things. It has 5 integrators, 4 summers, which is like the summing, 2 comparators, different ports you can hook things into it, 2 multipliers. So this is a good example of like how analog computation works and how you can build a device that does this. And then Amanda in the Slack, I don't remember what channel it's in, but I think it's in Cognition Future. She posted on some papers that were related to this. So these 2 books that they sell, actually. The first one is this analog and hybrid computer programming book. So this is like I guess a cookbook for like doing things with this device. And then the other one is this other book that is, I guess it's just analog computing, kind of an overview of the area. So, we talk about some of these things. So this just tells you how these things work. This goes back to the Anticipatory mechanism, which is from ancient Greece, where they, built a computer. They built astrolabes, which allowed you to measure, for navigation, measuring things in the stars, distances on Earth, because you could use the stars to navigate. Slide rules, planimeters, differential gears, integrators. So there are all these different mechanical fire control systems. There are all these different control systems and computational models that you can build as physical things, and you can use these. And these are all analog computers. So so going from that to these basic computing elements, it's this is a very good resource for this. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is we talked about Stable Diffusion, and I wanted to point to this GitHub repository where they have all of the forks listed for Stable Diffusion. So this is a huge network of people who have made forks on the main Stable Diffusion repo, which is here by CompViz. So this is a research group at LMU Munich, and they're doing they kind of this is sort of the home of Stable Diffusion, where it was developed, and then now they have all these forks that are being generated. So they did the basic training of the model, and then now these forks, they're using the model in different ways. Some people are able to implement this on like an M1 Mac, which is the silicon chip for Mac, as opposed to using like a big machine. The interesting thing about this is that you can train this on their cloud computing resources, but you have to pay at a certain point if you want to train it any more than it's already been trained. So there's some limitations. That's why people would create forks. But there are different things, all sorts of different things you can do here with this software. The next thing I wanted to talk about was this was actually posted by I can't remember who posted this, but yeah, on Twitter. But this is generative AI won't revolutionize game development just yet. And so this is something about generative using generative AI for game development. So it's a pretty hot area where people are using. So in video game development, usually you want to create worlds and graphics and what they call digital assets for your game. And so when you do that, it takes a lot of work. There are a lot of artists who do things with that. There's a lot of coordination. And, one might think, well, why don't we just use generative AI to do that? And it's easy to do that if you're, if you have the infrastructure. But, it's not just as easy as having the infrastructure. It's something that people can do, but the key here isn't just to do it, to create the assets. The key is to get people to be able to play the game and be engaged with the game and create a successful game. So, creating a video game demands hard, repetitive work. Developers are in the business of building worlds. This means that generative AI has a lot of potential, but there are a lot of problems with, hype in this area, like saying that I'm going to build this AI that's a killer app for this. And then, but we know from like some of these, from general AI hype, but also some of these platforms that they don't always give good outputs. So like, you might try to, especially if you're using a generative model in real time to build an AI model and, generate things in a video game. As people see them, that can be a problem. You can have issues with that. And so there are a lot of things that kind of break the illusion of the game to make it less enjoyable. And these are the sort of the open issues that people have with using this technology in games, is that, so it's not that generative AI can't or shouldn't be used in game development. It's that people aren't being realistic about what it could do. So AI could design some generic weapons or write some dialogue, but compared to text or image generation, level design is fiendish. You can forgive generators that produce a face with wonky ears or some lines of gibberish text, but a broken game level, no matter how magical it looks, is useless. So this is something that is the big challenge here, and so there's a lot of work to do here. It's an interesting area of application, but again, you have these, and then there's this whole backlash to generative AI. So with Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, people are questioning, do you really have permission to use those images? Do we really want to use images that are just scraped from the internet, or do we want specialized images? Do we want, do people accept sort of the representations that are produced? Or, is there some value in creating it by hand that we don't really know about? And of course, it's going to disrupt the video game industry, because there are a lot of people who build music and images and graphics for video games that, a generative AI could upend that whole industry. But it's worth thinking about. I know that there's been some interest in that. It looks like Brian had to leave. Okay, yeah. And then the last paper I want to get into is this paradox of open redux. So this talks a bit about open, in this term open that I've used in the class that I'm teaching, and in the idea of open. So, this is kind of like a term that, like, if you just say it to people who aren't initiated, they don't know what you're talking about. But so open is both a challenger and an enabler of concentrations of power. We wrote 2 years ago when we launched Open Future. Today, after many conversations about what we called then the paradox of open, so they have an article on the paradox of open, and a series of responses to our essay, the statement still rings true. However, we have also learned that open activists are divided on the issue of addressing the imbalances of power that concern open ecosystems, technology, content, and data. So this is really kind of getting at this power relationship that I talked about in lecture 4. Getting at how that's a threat to governance, but how it involves a lot of things. It involves data, content, the use of technologies themselves, whether they're accessible to the contributors, and then these ecosystems. So the idea is, you have these things, you have the system that's open, but maybe some of these things aren't as open as they could be, or they kind of violate the values that you're trying to, advance. And so this is so an expanding space of copyright activism. So there's this, in one of the responses, there's a need to expand and not to switch the focus of copyright advocacy. Advocating for openness must account for how circumstances have changed, choosing new strategies and tactics. So for copyright activists, there's still a need to make sense of how our activism and its stakes could be expanded. And this is the example they give is the AI Commons initiative, where we explored the use of openly licensed photographs for people for training AI systems. The case has often been portrayed as one of the major challenges to open licensing frameworks in the last decade, which I think we've talked about already. Indeed, it is one of the strongest examples of reuse at scale, with 100 million images, or a quarter of all openly licensed photographs, being used in AI training datasets. So there's some risks to this if there are faces or personal information that is extracted. You have to be cognizant of that, and there are risks that are involved in that. There are also other issues of open advocates saying that there's a collective sense that the problems, while real, are not copyright issues. So some of these are beyond copyright and just simply ethical issues. Some of these are directly related to the licensing. But the paradox is that these challenges, although external to the open frameworks, ultimately need to be addressed by their stakeholders. So this is a stakeholder issue where people have to be good stewards of data, as well as their, conforming to their license and keeping their project open, but also being aware of these issues. And then there's this whole issue of complexity, where you have, you have all this complexity that happens when you develop these new frameworks, a lot of legal issues, a lot of, different types of things that intersect with expertise and interoperability. And then this just kind of advocates for a stronger commons. So this is, I don't know if I posted this in the Slack. I don't think I did, but I'm going to post it for people to look at and comment on more. I may actually also post it in the Discord channel on project management, because I may return to that in one of the other lectures that I'm going to give next week. So I'm going to finish up today on, the first one is this paper on many paths to anticipatory behavior, anticipatory model acquisition across phylogenetic and ontogenic timescales. And this is actually a biological theory paper by Matthew Sims. I'm not familiar with the author, but the journal is Biological Theory. So this is biological, but it's also sort of philosophy. There's some relationships to agents and to cognition as well. So the abstract reads, under the assumption that anticipatory models are required for anticipatory behavior, an important question arises about the different manners in which organisms acquire anticipatory models. This article aims to articulate 4 different non-exhaustive ways that anticipatory models might possibly be acquired over both phylogenetic and ontogenetic timescales, and explore the relationships among them. So anticipatory models are kind of an old idea that Richard Rosen wrote about them extensively in the 70s and 80s, the 1970s and 1980s. And it's an idea, this is of course one of the ideas behind behavior and cognition, is that, you have an organism or you have an agent that interacts with its environment, and its sort of action is driven by anticipation. So you have to have, especially in learning, but also in just behavior, there has to be some anticipation. There has to be some motivation, or there has to be some sort of expectation that something is going to happen. You can have an agent that just basically responds or reacts to the environment. Like if there's a flash of light, it moves towards the light. If there's a flash of light in another direction, it changes direction and moves towards that light. Now that agent is going to be somewhat dumb, and it won't necessarily be able to survive well in an environment that's always changing, and where the agent has to integrate a lot of information to really make coherent behaviors. Otherwise, it just kind of moves around according to Brownian motion. As we've talked about in previous meetings, this isn't particularly adaptive. But what you can have, of course, is you can have a memory, or you can have an associative network that allows you to build these models of anticipation. What that means is associating, say, that flash of light with some food reward, or knowing that one, type of, one color of light is different from another color of light. That one is associated with reward and maybe one is associated with danger. Or knowing that, like, if there's a flash of light on the left-hand side of your visual area, there might be a flash of light on the right-hand side of your visual area soon after. So all those things can be integrated, and that leads us to this anticipatory behavior. So, like, this is useful for agents that are cognitive or behavioral, but also you see anticipatory behavior in cells, in single-cell organisms, or in cells in the body where they have to anticipate certain things in the environment, like the presence or absence of some metabolite or some other type of thing. And so this is always, this is a very useful model, anticipatory behavior, for understanding sort of the fundamentals of behavior and cognition. So in this paper, he's talking about 4 different ways that anticipatory models might possibly be acquired. So you're talking about the acquisition of these types of models, from single-cell organisms to more, complex organisms where you have multiple cells, multiple systems operating. So to articulate these different model acquisition mechanisms, 4 schematics will be introduced, each of which represents a particular acquisition structure that can be used for the purposes of comparison, analysis, and hypothesis formulation. By bringing to the fore the differences and similarities between each of the 4 ways that anticipatory models are acquired, a more complete picture of both anticipatory behavior and its pervasive role in biological self-maintenance can be offered. So this is thought of as like a self-organizing aspect. So it's not just like, something that you acquire due to some event happening. This is something that self-organizes, maybe phylogenetically, so it might be like something that a species will, it'll be adaptive, and there will be a speciation event where this thing is fixed in a certain species, or you might evolve this sort of ability. So this is something that we have to think about in terms of its phylogeny, in terms of its development, but also in terms of its, not just being something that is triggered on and off. In doing so, this article helps not only to shed light on how anticipatory behavior might arise in the wide range of organisms that has been observed, but also to throw in relief the subtle and often still overlooked causal interplay between ontogenetic and phylogenetic plasticity. And so what this means is that there are 2 different types of plasticity that they're kind of referring to in evolution. The first is ontogenetic, which is where you have plasticity over the lifespan, plasticity over development, where you get things that change in development. You get a developmental trajectory, and you might get things that get put into place in development, like a visual system or like a cognitive system where you acquire different cognitive abilities, throughout your childhood or your development. And then those things can be modified. So, with experience, you can gain the ability for, certain visual acuities and things like that. This is contrasted with phylogenetic plasticity, which is where you get things that change over evolution. So where you get a speciation event, or where you get variation in evolution across different taxonomic groups. These are things that you'll see plasticity in. So you can see changes in some traits over others, and this gives us this ability to change. So this paper gets into a lot of the reviews, the anticipatory behavior literature so anticipatory behavior refers to the ability of an organism to coordinate its behavior with one or more future environmental or organismal states, proactively influencing how or whether such states occur. So this has been of great interest to cognitive science and psychology over the history of the field. So it goes back to the 1930s and 40s, and people have written reviews on it since with regularity. So interestingly, within the last 30 years, various biological studies have suggested that anticipatory behavior is not limited to neuronal organisms, but may also be exhibited by organisms such as bacteria, fungi, slime molds, amoeba, and plants. And so this idea that, there's anticipatory behavior, not just in a cognitive sense in neurons, but also in physiological processes. And so, these are different things, and they're going to be different in these different organisms. So in slime molds, for example, slime molds are exposed to some stimulus. There's locomotion output that you can correlate differences in the stimulus and the strength of the stimulus with changes in locomotion. And that's interpreted to be this anticipatory response. Whether this example or any other instances of AB in non-neuronal organisms should truly be considered an expression of cognition is a matter of debate. So, this is somewhat controversial in the sense that you're kind of interpreting these anticipatory behaviors, but it's also very clear that there's some mechanism there that is, sort of like it's reinforcement learning like. It responds to some stimulus, maybe a reward, some association with something in the environment, and it changes the output behavior in a systematic way. One answer has been suggested by numerous scholars that AB requires organisms instantiate internal anticipatory models, the structure of which captures the structure of the organism's environment and the manner in which the organism's actions affect both it and its environment. So this is, again, one of these ideas of an internal model or a representational model, a very simple representational model that allows the organism to have this anticipatory response. So this is, you can look at adaptive control of sensory motor movement, or the ability to prepare for resource fluctuations, or mounting defensive responses to threats. And so all these are maybe viewed as an internal model or cognitive representation, or maybe just an internal representation of the environment and what will come, what is to come, and how to protect the organism. So this article focuses on 4 ways that these anticipatory models might be acquired. And so these are the 4 ways. The first is mutation-based acquisition. So this is where you get a mutational change that allows for this thing to appear. So this model appears with a mutation or a set of mutations. Number 2, it could be epigenetic inheritance-based. So there's an area of research on epigenetic inheritance, which is where it's not in the genome with mutations, it's that there are changes in the epigenetics and the control of gene expression that get passed down. There have been experiments where it's been passed down a couple of generations, or in C. elegans, there have been experiments where they found that it's been passed down 15 or 16 generations. The point is that it's not like a mutational based change where it's sort of permanent in that taxonomic group's genome. It's where until there's another set of mutations that supplants it. There's this transient response, which maybe lasts a couple of generations, that is programmed by the environmental state. So, if there's a period of starvation, that acts as a memory that suppresses a response to maybe like enhanced metabolism. So there are these changes that are maybe less permanent than the mutation-based acquisition, but still are responsive to the environment. 3 is associative learning-based acquisition, which is where you associate stimuli and you acquire this ability to anticipate based on that. So you can associate 2 things in the environment, and you know that, or the agent has sort of not a lookup table, but sort of an idea of what to expect. Sometimes the associative learning acquisition is wrong. So sometimes you can make spurious associations with things in the environment. But this is a mechanism that by and large works to sort of, in a conservative way to safeguard the organism from changes in the environment, or potentially negative changes in the environment. And then 4 is this Baldwin effect based acquisition. So the Baldwin effect is something I don't think we've talked about, but it's this idea of, some people use it to model cultural evolution, but it's this idea of it's almost like an idea of learning from the environment, or learning from things that changes that happen at an evolutionary scale. I'm not really doing this idea justice, but let's see if they define it better in the paper, because I don't really have a reference up on Baldwinian learning right here in front of me. But this is the schematic of an anticipatory model. So this is the environment, and then this is the model. And these S's are organismal states. So if you're in organismal state 1 and you want to move to organismal state 2, you can simply move there. But you don't really know, you don't know which direction to move. Maybe you move from 1 to 2. You, like I said in the original example, you could move to, you just respond to your environment blindly. There's no real structure to your response. And so as a result, you just make these random movements, and that's not particularly, it doesn't conform to the fitness you need to survive. So this state 1 actually can consult a model that is the state prime or the state star, which is then maps what happens in the environment to the set of states that maybe are the most adaptive or most likely outcomes. And then this gets mapped to behavior, which then is interacting with the environment. State 1 and state 2 inform this model. So the actual states performed in the environment inform this model, so that these, when you're in state 1, you can consult this model, and then it guides behavior in a way that's more interactive with the environment. So this is the way they've kind of mapped this out. And so these 4 paths, because it goes through these 4 paths, let me go down to the Baldwinian learning, because that was the one that I'm the least clear on. Okay, this is the Baldwin effect. So the Baldwin effect refers to a hypothetical evolutionary process proposed by psychologist James Mark Baldwin. It was introduced as a manner of supplementing Darwinian evolution by natural selection, due to Baldwin's contention that random mutation by itself was unlikely to account for all of the variations that are selected for in nature or produced. So there's this idea that random mutation isn't enough for some of these behavioral adaptations to occur. And so the Baldwin effect posits a case in which some novel non-heritable phenotype that is plastically induced in a subpopulation not only results in the increased survival and fitness of those individuals that exhibit it, but over many subsequent generations of selection, acting in the direction of the phenotype, it becomes a heritable trait. So this is something like the example of like epigenetic acquisition or epigenetic inheritance, acting as a means to guide the phenotype or the agent's behavior, and then that phenotype gets incorporated into a genetic change. So it's like taking that epigenetic inheritance and turning it into a mutational inheritance that's then preserved across generations, that is more or less immutable or innate. And so people have done different things with the Baldwin effect in the artificial life community to sort of model what that would look like. But it's kind of a controversial mechanism, because it's something that you acquire maybe in development, but it's hard to really kind of get a handle on the finding examples in nature. So there are this idea of phenotypic accommodation, where you get novel or unusual environmental inputs that produce a particular non-heritable phenotypic plastic response. So you might have like a response to seeing a really rapid sequence of flashing lights, and that might lead to you expanding your ability to sample the environment, or your sampling rate of your visual system. But that's not heritable yet. And so the idea is that plasticity occurs maybe in your lifetime or in development, and then eventually this becomes something that gets integrated into the evolution of the organism, or it becomes heritable in some way. And so this is something that, or sometimes it may be that this ability is refined in certain individuals who outcompete other individuals. So if you're thinking about agents in an evolutionary context, those individuals that can do this sort of phenotypic accommodation better survive, and then this becomes a heritable trait. So there are a lot of ways that this can play out, but the Baldwin effect is really triggered by some of these behavioral adaptations or adaptations with respect to behavior. So this paper goes through a lot of this stuff, goes through these different examples of how you get these anticipatory behaviors. And I think it's worth thinking about in terms of like some of the things we've talked about with respect to, we got something else here. Is this a new person, or this is a bot of some type, or robot? Anyways, it's worth thinking about in terms of reinforcement learning and some of the other things we've talked about with cognition. We haven't talked a lot in Cognition Futures about the evolution of cognition and behavior, but this is something very much related to that. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. Yeah, I just I just wanted to give a short overview of that paper because I thought it was interesting and has a lot of tentacles with respect to agents and agent behaviors and even some of the non-neural behaviors that we talk about in the group.
Yeah, that was really cool. Not to get in the car, but I want to go over that, particularly the Baldwin effect. That looks really interesting for me, and some of the things that I'm like my deeper projects basically that I want to get into in the future, and be related to that. So yeah, please highlight that when you put it in Slack or whatever. Let me know about it. But otherwise, I'm gonna head out.
Okay. Well, have a good week, everyone.
See ya. Thanks for the presentation. That was really interesting.
Thanks. Take care.